same guy you heard yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, same one.
It's a new angle. So I'm going to talk about the, once again, about the zero lower bound and the interest rates we have right now, which are very, very low, and the discussion about secular stagnation. I mentioned yesterday the talk by, well, the book by Robert Gordon, big books about productivity and what's happening. And I will talk about a discussion which was between Ben Bernanke, previous Federal Reserve chairman, and with, was talking with Larry Summers, and Larry Summers has not invented secular stagnation, but he's in the front row and is making a lot of speeches about secular stagnation, Larry Summers. So they were discussing on a blog, and I was saying, well, is it possible we have a zero lower bound? What does it mean? And one was saying that's not possible. So very briefly, I will talk about this concept, what's happening when we are very close to the zero interest rates. A few words about the macroeconomic environment. I already talked yesterday, but what's secular stagnation? There is a joke in French, waiting for Godot. It's a joke because people are waiting for new technology to be saved. So there's a lot of speeches about data processing and the internet, which will save us from the depression and the secular stagnation. So you will read that everywhere in the OECD, IMF, even in the report for the US president. There is a strong call for stimulus, economic stimulus everywhere right now. I have a paper in my bag from the FT, the Financial Times. Everybody is asking for stimulus because people are really afraid of the slowdown. And one of the solutions to this problem is infrastructures, and I will talk about that. Infrastructure, and that's a link with what I'm going to say about this discussion between Summers and Bernanke and Samuelson, which was mentioned by Nadia. Samuelson is a very famous, very, very famous economist. I read Samuelson when I was a young guy. And Summers and Bernanke talks about Samuelson. What does he say about the zero lower bound and the depressed economy? So very quickly, right now interest rates are lower. Yesterday, the European central banks went to minus 0.4% interest rates. So it's going down. As I mentioned yesterday, a fourth of sovereign debt is in negative interest rates. Japan has made sovereign debt emission at 30 years with the interest rate of less than 0.5% for 30 years. And all the Japanese sovereign debts less than 11 years are negative right now. In France, I think it's around 0 for 7 years duration. So what should we do? Well, what all the economists are saying right now, everywhere, that we should do something about that. And we have to take care because previous policy recommendations were to a better mastering of public debt, as you all know, especially in Europe, with what was called the Maastricht Treaty and the constraints of the 3% on GDP in public debt outstandings. Right now, people have changed their mind because they are really afraid of the situation, and they want to have to launch a kind of Keynesian action, to launch a lot of spending, especially public spending. This is from the Wall Street Journal, what was saying the OECD just a few days ago. On the right, you have the report to the president. I will talk about that. It's a report published in January, report to the president of the United States every year. And there is a chapter on infrastructures to say that US should put a lot of money in public transport infrastructures. In Germany, you have the same debate because infrastructure in Germany are quite old. And at the bottom right here, this is the Juncker plan. You have this massive 315 billion euros in 3 years attempt to launch public investment, well, public and private investment, as a matter of fact, but they propose to put forward public investments. They call for all the government, it was 2 years ago, sending their projects. I can tell you, for instance, Poland, I know they are Polish here, but Poland sent in the response, they were building all their highways, all their trains, and all their harbors. So that was a big project for Poland. By itself, I think they could consume the 315 billion euros. So when people write at the OECD, at the IMF, or well, at the World Bank about infrastructure projects, very often people are frightened because they know that we are able, and we have done that in Europe, for instance, we have been able to build airports with no plane. We have been able to build highways with no cars in Portugal, in Spain, or in other countries. That's called, people are afraid of what's called white elephants. White elephants are projects stupid with no meaning, but still you do that because you need to launch your economy, to vitalize, to give you stimulus. For instance, Japan, for tens of years, for decades and decades, has been doing bridges, highways, to try to stimulate its economy. So these white elephants are frightening for everybody because people know it's just stupid to build new airports with no plane. These are not fundamentally white elephants, but these are big projects. The second point is that, yes, in infrastructures, people are scary because some of these projects are quite big. Now, sometimes big, sometimes they are very, very big. So the name of white elephant is quite good because it's a big beast. I mentioned a few of them you probably know because Lyon-Torino. The Lyon-Torino tunnel is quite famous because it's been in discussion for tens of years now, and it's a 25 billion euros project. Someone told me it's more around 40 billion euros project. It's very, very expensive. I mentioned, well, these are the two biggest for France. It's Canal Seine-Nord for just 4 billion, so it's a smaller one. Project to connect a canal in the north of France. Right here in Switzerland, you have the $12 billion Swiss Transit project. I will show you a slide on it. Our friends Germans are very scary about white elephants and bad infrastructure projects because they have the examples of the Berlin airport, which is a catastrophe. And it's already, no, it's not yet, but at the end of the day, it will cost 6.8 billion euros to do this airport, which still doesn't work, I've been told. I've never been in Berlin by planes, I don't know. But so when you work on this kind of project, and all the literature which has been written for many years, and especially since 2008, you need to have a very precise socioeconomic benefits analysis which could take into account EROI. It could. It, most of the time, does not. And when you look at this socioeconomic analysis for some kind of project, infrastructure mostly is transport, a large part of it is transportation, a large part of it is utilities, and in utilities, the biggest part is energy, but there is also, for instance, water. And the last part, very often you talk about telecom infrastructure project. So if you think of these three categories of project, the link with energy is quite obvious for a large part of infrastructure project, transportation, for instance, and energy production. But there are other benefits, and there is a lot of literature about socio-economic benefits analysis. In France, we are very fond to write reports because this is public money, and people want to understand how we made our choice at the beginning, and then you have to look years after years. Was it good choices? And what happened? And very often you look at, from the economic point of view, short-term multiplier and long-term multiplier. What is the impact of your project, especially transportation, but also energy production? From a short-term point of view, mostly it's employment or fighting unemployment. And the long-term point of view, what will happen with these new highways or with this new airport? I didn't mention one airport which is quite famous in France too. I should have. There is I'm from Brittany, so I can tell you it's very bizarre. There are many airports in Brittany. Well, it's a kind of, it's really bizarre. It's really, I didn't want to, well, I'll tell you at the end of the day. This is the example of the Gotthard Tunnel. So it's a Swiss project which was talked about in the Financial Times just a few days ago because there are a lot of discussion in Switzerland about what will happen It's doubling a tunnel. So it's quite a big one, you know. It's 12 billion, I already mentioned, but it could be an elephant. It could be, if you know the literature. But this elephant is inside a snake, so it's very difficult to know the color of the elephant. But it could be a hat. Nobody knows. I think. Personally, I'm very fond of hats. So I come back to the heart of the presentation, which has a discussion. And so Bernanke wrote, it was a few weeks ago. That's why I've been working on this, because it's just mainstream discussion about what's happening. This is a real discussion about what's happening about the zero lower bound, secular stagnation. And I just looked at this discussion. I said, wow, what are they talking about? And they talked about the uncles of Larry Summers, because they are all the same bunch of people, you know. Bernanke is Larry Summers, and Larry Summers is has his uncle, which is a very famous economist called Paul Samuelson. And so he was a teacher of Bernanke and Larry Summers. And he said it would pay if the interest rate was so low. Well, it's impossible to interest rate to be so low, to be very, very low. Because if it was so low, it would pay to level the Rocky Mountains to save even the small amount of fuel expended by trains and cars that currently must climb steep grade. So when I read that, as of course, for the first time, they were talking about energy. So I said, wow, there's something to be done. Let's look at it. So I bought Samuelson. So this is the example of Bernanke. The Lion Torino, this is the website. You see the old train. This is right now how it's working. It's in French, sorry, but on this website, they mention, it's not vehicle operating cost, but they say it's costly, you know. You need two trains to attract the wagons. And there is an energy over cost of 40%. So they talk about it. I can tell you, most of the time, you've never seen that. But in this one, they talk about it. And this is the new tunnel, quite huge. And this is the historical tunnel, which is less than 1 kilometer. So I think this one must be 8 kilometers or something like that.
Which requires no energy to build.
You'll see. So I went to see what was really Samuelson saying. So Samuelson has written books that all economists have read. This is a Bible of macroeconomics. So he has been publishing his macroeconomic books for decades and decades. Very great economist and good teachers, because he was teachers of Bernanke and Larry Summers. So what does he say? He exactly writes that. Is it possible? As long as there is a single hilly railroad track left, it would pay at 0 rates of interest to make it level. Why? Because in a year, the savings in energy, would pay for the cost. So my paper is just about that. What does it really mean? I do it very quickly. So we'll be in scale because my talk is very fast. So it means that the cost of the infrastructures leveling the hill is less than what you will gain for the future years, from now to the end of time, maybe. And you will use, this is the discounting rate, bye-bye. Discounting rate you will use each year. So it's worth doing that if it costs less now than what it will cost, discounted by this discounting rate. And what does Samuelson say? He says that you will benefit from a gain in energy each year. So this is the start of the modeling. How it works? It works with energy efficiency per crossing the hill, multiplied by the traffic in the tunnel, multiplied by the price of energy at that time, of course. And here is a nice picture, not far from him, from Monteviso. This is my paper. It was a tunnel built in 1480, one of the first tunnels we ever did in the mountain. It's a small one, it's just 80 meters. It's a small elephant. It was very useful to link between Italy and France. Then I tried to make a lot of assumptions to go to my conclusion. The first assumption is that the traffic, when you use transport infrastructure, traffic is very closely linked to GDP. There are many reasons for that. Usually in the transport model, they use that. They try to use local GDP. For instance, railway transport company like the SNCF try to simulate with what would be the development of each region to look at the connection. There is a good reason for that, as you can understand. Transportation is just fundamental for economy because market is working with transport. If you have no transport, you have no market. The cost of transport is the key of the market. You need two things for the market: security and transport. So we can assume that transport is proportional to GDP, and GDP, as you know, it's what I talked about yesterday, but everybody knows it, is correlated to energy input. Strong assumption. Well, there is a big assumption, and there is something which is much obvious. The strong assumption is the price of energy. Here, very, very simple, the price will be always the same. This is a key question. What is going to be the price of energy? The best way to know that is look at the oil price, as you know, and the future oil price. And there are many reasons that make it quite flat, as you know. Future prices are very close to today's price. And there is a theory of arbitrage. What could you do if it was different? You could store the oil in a boat, and so on. Well, very often people say, well, let's take price all the same for the future. That's a big assumption, and I think it's worth doing another paper just on this assumption linked to the interest rate. But this is a hypothesis. Then, very simple idea is that the whatever they hate, because, as Jacques told me, and that's true, slopes of hills or mountains are quite constant. It's called the avalanche angle of slopes. It's quite proportional. So the energy you will consume for digging here is quite proportional to the energy you will save for each crossing. It's very simple. It's not true if you did what Samuelson said to level the hill. It's true if you dig a tunnel. If you level the hill, in fact, it will be in h squared. He was right. That's why nobody level any hill. That's why you create a tunnel, because it's less costly in time of energy. And then there is the other assumption is that digging, well, this kind of project, which is not true, this is very simplified, this kind of project is very close to the consumption of the energy to dig the tunnel. It's not true, there are other costs, in fact. But it's not very far, because as you know, as you can imagine, doing this kind of project, mostly, it took energy, especially this one. It took a lot of energy to dig that. But you could say, no, it's too simplistic. Well, and the last, it's not an hypothesis, it's a modeling. I tried to model and saying, well, let's have a law of future energy, which is just an exponential growth of energy. We talked about yesterday, and these are the figures I showed you yesterday for crude oil. So it's even if it's slower right now, people can say, well, it's growing every year per 1.2%, for instance, and it's still growing. Of course, in fact, you could have a negative row here, and that's the point. But for instance, for now, people say it's growing by plus 1.2% every year. When you put that in the equations, you have this global equation comparing the cost of digging the tunnel right now and the future savings here. So it's the ROI. It's a way of seeing ROI for this project. You are spending energy and money right now, and you are getting energy efficiency for the travel going. So it's exactly what was saying Samuelson in his speech. So the height of the mountain disappear in the equation. That's why I made these assumptions. There is no more price because the prices are constant, so price has disappeared. And the conclusions are quite easy. I could have been faster, but it's a kind of pedagogy. So the only parameters which are important are the discount rate, supposed by Samuelson, which is positive. Interest rates are positive. And the energy supply growth, rho. So here are the conclusion. If you have a growing economy, rho positive, as soon as the interest rates is less than the growth of the economy, dig your tunnel. Dig, dig, dig. As would say a famous candidate. Well, drill, drill, drill. I will talk about drill, drill, drill at the end of my talk. So you go for the years, for the projection years, as long as you need, because it's more than 1 year. So one day, you will make profit. You can make profit with an interest rate higher, but it's more complex. That's not obvious. Some project will be okay, some will not. That could be a reason to decrease rate year after year. So one day, your interest rate is lower than rho. As a matter of fact, I'm working on that too. I was talking with Jean-Marc Jancovici about that. We have to work, and I have not yet time to look at the public discount rates in France, and I would like to, if people here have been working or know what is the public discount rate in their countries, but in France there has been a debate. The public discount rates for public infrastructure was between, I think, the 80s and 2005, it was around 8%. Then it has decreased to 4%, and then there was talk to decrease it even lower. And as, like Ivar mentioned a little bit, there is a debate, and there are a lot of papers by Mr. Gaulier and other people to put it negative. Let's have a negative interest rate. So to be lower and lower and lower. But the problem is when rho is negative, suppose we are in degrowth from the supply of energy. When it's negative, it's obvious you have to have the interest rates the lowest as possible. So if there is a zero lower bound, put it at 0. And that's somehow what's happening right now. Before my conclusion, so I'll be in time, I just want to mention that this is just, it has nothing to do with reality. I presented to you a page from the website on the Lyon-Turin, but they mention energy efficiency. My idea is that the project is such a big white elephant, the Lyon-Turin project, they need to put all the ideas or arguments forward to present it as a beautiful dog or a beautiful cat. But this is not the truth when you read all the socioeconomic study about infrastructure. And especially, for instance, in this report to the president, published a few weeks ago, I can tell you that the most important argument are these two ones. The most important social benefit is time. Infrastructure for transport, the key element is time. Speed. It's never, never energy efficiency. You can say there's something between speed and energy efficiency. I don't think so. I think it's a question of preference for time. And there are a lot of works on time efficiency and what's the cost of time, traffic jams, and so on. A lot of work. Hundreds of people are working on that. The reliability is a second, I would say, is second most important argument, and it's more than reliability. There is the cost of life. What is the cost of a life of a human being when the road is safer, for instance, on a highway than on a normal road? And I can tell you, so the energy efficiency, here it's mentioned, so I was very glad that the report the president talked about energy a little bit, but this is not the key point. And they mentioned a lot what we were talking yesterday about productivity in the reports or in the study, and all the socioeconomic gains. So you mix many, many kind of parameters, and all this is this is a whole science, socioeconomic benefits analysis, looking at the different parameters and trying to have just a unique way to compare different solutions. Quite complex. So we would like to put forward energy. This is really not the point. The point is to use many things you mix, and at the end of the day you have euros or dollars, where you put life in euros, you put time in euros, and you put other things in euros. Very complex. So the example I mentioned is very schematic. Next step, I'm going to work on 3 different kind of projects. The first one is to look at the mortgage markets. What's going to happen at the DLB when the interest rates are very low? What's going to happen to the most important market in the world, which is the housing market? Half balance sheets of French banks are housing mortgages, for instance. And it's quite complex because, as maybe you've read the literature these days, going to zero for banks is very complex. Are we going to have negative interest rates mortgage? I'm not sure. If we do not, what are the solutions? And can we propose solutions to change, not to change that, but to take into account the fact that it will be difficult to have zero or negative interest rates mortgage credit. One of the solutions is to have a longer duration for credits. So like in Japan, you have a credit for 40 years. I'm not sure from a socio-economic or societal point of view it's possible. Another would be to use subventions, clever subvention by the state, which was quite difficult, but I think it's an idea we should look at closely. The second step I would like to work is to work on this public discounting rate. I've been working on that for now 4 years now, and I think there are many issues about that. People are changing their mind. They know that it's very bizarre to have such a price for the futures and to have a weight of the future which is nothing compared to the present. So as Eva has mentioned, this is a key issue everywhere. And the last thing would be to work on another kind of project, which is energy production. So I talked with some of you here. I think we should look, especially about oil. I present an oil rig. We should look at what would be the consequence working on that with a simple equation. This is the capex for the capex plus rho has nothing to do with the other rho. It's the uncertainty on the project. As you know, many projects cost much more than was forecast at the beginning. I like to talk about Kashagan, for instance, which is $50 billion. And I think Kashagan at the beginning was not $50 billion. $billion of investment. And this project, as was mentioned yesterday by Victor, we have the initial volume of oil coming out. You have the depletion rate. This is the price. This is the OPEX. And you will put the interest rates, the time for the future. My idea right now is that there is a zero lower bound. Well, there are 2 points important here. There is, of course, the uncertainty of the price of oil. I think everybody now is scared by the uncertainty on the price. So how can you take a 50 billion project like Kashagan when I'm not sure at all what's going on to happen for the investment? So this is one big issue. But my conviction is that we could show that there is a zero lower bound because depletion rate is just working like a discount rate, just the same. So maybe the zero lower bound is the depletion rate of conventional oil, which we mean we won't go lower than -4 or 5%. At that rate, all the oil project in a conventional world becomes profitable. Of course, there is a problem of the COP21 and the uncertainty you put on the future. And that would change this conclusion, of course. So to conclude, if you read, and this is in my paper I will send all of you, if you read Samuelson, he was aware it was quite scary to be close to the zero carbon. It was a catastrophe for him. It was the end of the day. He used very biblical languages. But he said, wow, if it happens, it shouldn't. But if it happens, we have to do something. And he said, we should use state guarantee to make much more investments. And it's exactly what we have done with the Juncker plan. Use state guarantee for 315 billion to guarantee new investment to stimulate the economy. So we have a symptom that something is really very, very serious. So I mentioned we are going through the 0 Celsius, which is the 0% interest rate right now. We are crossing it. It's quite difficult. As you know, we should remove banknotes. Well, you have maybe already read about that. We have to remove banknotes so people are not interested to take their money and to put it under the mattress. But there are a lot of discussions to remove it and to use blockchain money and just electronic money. So your money will disappear year after year. So I mentioned the 0 Kelvin, which could be the crude oil depletion rate as the absolute. And the last point is, as I mentioned, it's difficult in all the hypotheses and all the work we are doing not to take into account a growing price of energy. I said very quickly, I'm supposing that this is a flat price. This is just stupid. We know it won't happen. But how we do that with a carbon price or the other solution, I don't know. But we have to work on that. Just to give some hope. So we have been working for 1 year. It was in 13 about this massive public energy efficiency retrofit in Europe program for 120 billion euros. And we've been promoting these programs in Europe everywhere. The French government, we've been talking with German people. There is a good site on it. We see it as an alternative to doing very stupid white elephants. I'm quite pessimistic. We won't avoid white elephants. There will be white elephants. We are going to make highways with no car, airports with no planes. We can do that. And there is a lot of reasons to do that. I think this is a much, 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 much more clever program. The difficulty is that there are very small projects. We are talking about a 1 million euros project per operation compared to 100 billion for the white elephants. We did it from a mainstream. This is the report. It's in English and in French. This is the synthesis in German, English, in French. And it's part of it. The French proposition was taken by the French government in the Ecole plan proposal, so you can find it in the documents on the European website. And we use it in a very mainstream way, using PPP, energy performance contracting, taking into account the Maastricht Treaty constraints, and so on. But of course, we used, in this project, we used an increasing price of energy. We had to. Thank you.